academic papers, understanding assignment instructions. By the end of this workshop, you will be familiar with the kinds of information you can expect to find in assignment instructions, and you'll be able to break down assignment instructions into steps to help you manage your time in the writing process. Just to give you a sense of how we've structured the workshop this morning, for the first 30 minutes, Natalie and I will present some of the things we've learned about reading assignment instructions. In our one-to-one appointments with students, we see many assignment guidelines from a wide variety of courses and programs. We'd like to share some of the strategies that we've learned about using assignment instructions to set up a writing process. After we've gone through about 30 minutes of presentation, Natalie will then introduce you to the Writing Tutor program and show you how you can access the ALC's one-to-one service that supports undergraduate students with their writing. For the last 30 minutes, we'll have a question and answer period with 4 of the Academic Learning Center's writing tutors, experienced students who can answer some of your questions about the writing process. This workshop is the first in a series of 3 prep week workshops focused on writing. Tomorrow, we'll focus on finding and using sources, especially strategies for reading and note-taking. Please feel free to come back tomorrow if you think that would be useful to you. On Thursday, we'll focus on drafting the paper, that is, presenting your ideas and your analysis in a way that's clear and shows that you're an informed writer. Let's get started with today's workshop. Natalie, I'm going to pass you the ball.
For sure. And now I can move the slide over. So, to get us thinking about writing in a university setting, let's start by reflecting for a minute or two on the following question. What concerns do you have about writing papers at university? Feel free to send your answers in the chat as they come up for you. You can send them to either host, presenter, and panelists, or to all participants, depending on your comfort level. We'll give you a few minutes, and then Coral can kind of sum up some of the concerns that are coming up for you. What concerns do you have about writing papers at university? Okay. Are we seeing any responses that like someone we'd want to hear, we want to share anonymously, of course?
Natalie, you should be hearing from Coral any minute.
Perfect.
I think Coral is maybe muted.
Oh, we have a Q&A.
Coral, are you able to unmute?
Okay. Let me. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Wonderful. So in the chat, I was seeing a lot of concerns about citation, particularly how to do it, all the different styles of citation, as well as how to make sure you don't accidentally plagiarize.
Yes.
Those are big things.
Those are definitely some pretty valid concerns. I think I saw something briefly also about time management.
Procrastination.
Yeah, I agree, is definitely a valid concern when it comes to writing academic papers, for sure.
And one of the other big concerns raised is understanding what the assignment is asking for, especially since it's not easy to talk with your classmates about it.
Yeah, that is super valid, especially with that added level of kind of difficulty given the remote setting that we're in this year. But you've come to the right place. We're actually talking about that today, so that's great.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of worry about transitioning from high school to university and the different styles of papers that you have to write there.
For sure. We will touch on that today as well, and I have a resource that you can check out for more information on all of that as well. So that's
now,
good.
Can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely, yeah.
Just to say on the first two concerns that Coral mentioned, citation and plagiarism, in tomorrow's workshop we'll be focusing partly on paraphrasing, which is an aspect of academic integrity. And then in Thursday's workshop, we'll be talking more about citing and referencing, and I'll be co-presenting with Loie Gervais, who is the university's academic integrity coordinator. So if you're concerned about citing and referencing and plagiarism, I think the workshop tomorrow will begin to get at that, and then on Thursday we will address it a little bit more directly.
Awesome. Is there anything else that was coming up, Coral?
Grammar and vocabulary and what level university expects for vocabulary was also something coming up a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be tricky to navigate some of that stuff. But I think you'll see some of that throughout the workshops that we're doing this week. So. Cool. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you so much for all of your responses. Now we can actually start to kind of address the concern about writing in high school versus writing in university. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details of what writing assignments look like in universities, let's take a look at how they might be different from the ones you see in high school. So the screenshot on this slide is a web page from the U of M First Year Center. On this page, you can find a rundown of a number of differences between what your experience might be like in high school versus what it might be like in university. It covers topics such as how studying, learning, test-taking, exams might be different in university versus in high school. Today we're going to be focusing mostly on how writing is different in high school and university, but by the end of the week you should be able to find this link in the U of M or UM Learn course for this workshop. And so if you want to kind of dig into the other topics a bit more, you can check that out there. But today in high school, the goal of writing assignments is usually to practice the basics of writing, including brainstorming, structuring papers, paraphrasing, and citation. You may be asked to do some research, but you're probably not going to need to kind of look for specific sources or specific kinds of sources, and you probably won't be asked to think like super critically about the kinds of sources that you're using. In university, on the other hand, you're going to be asked to write in a particular format, style, or set of styles appropriate to your field of study. So there's that citation style step coming up. And you're going to be asked to research your topic in order to find evidence to support your ideas that is scholarly, or in other words, provided by experts. So the types of sources you're using are pretty specific. You'll also be asked to cite and provide references for all of your information. And this is really important to do because it helps your reader track where you're finding your information and to show your academic integrity. So again, that citation stuff is coming up. Note that papers in university are generally based on research and analysis rather than on your opinion as they might have been in high school, although there are, of course, some exceptions to that.
Okay, let's talk specifically about assignment guidelines. You can think of your assignment guidelines as a sort of roadmap that will guide you through the process of writing your papers. You'll want to keep referring to them throughout the process of reading and writing pretty much at each step along the way to ensure that you're on the right track. Make sure to hold on to them when you get them and keep them close at hand when you're working on the paper. One thing I would say here is that if you're unsure of some of the what's involved with that assignment guideline, this is a great reason for coming to see a writing tutor. They're really good at sort of parsing apart what assignment guidelines are all about. Let's take a look at one example. What might an assignment guideline look like? Here's one example. These are the instructions for a writing assignment that I gave to my students a few years ago in a second-year course. The sheet on the left of your screen is the guideline itself. Don't worry about trying to read it. That's not important. It could be confusing out of context. I'm showing you these instructions just so that you can see how detailed some undergraduate assignment instructions can be. In fact, many assignment instructions that we see in our Writing Tutor program are detailed like this. On the right-hand side, you'll see the grading rubric that I used for the same assignment. Not every assignment you'll get will have a grading rubric, but if it's available, it's a good idea to look at it before starting to work on the paper. A rubric shows you how your paper will be graded, and often it will give you a breakdown of what you need to do in really concrete, specific terms. So why are some guidelines so detailed? Not all of them are this detailed, but some of them are. I can say from my own experience as an instructor that I write my guidelines in this way so that students can see clearly what I'm expecting. I'm trying to be transparent. I want students to know what sources I want them to read, what kinds of questions I want them to think about as they're reading and as they're writing. And I want them to know the kind of paper I want them to write in my course. Back over to you, Natalie.
Okay, so since instructors often include quite a bit of detail in their assignment guidelines, when you first receive these guidelines, it can be useful to have a set of questions to help guide your reading so that you can pull out all of the essential information. So here are some of the questions I would recommend asking yourself when you first read through your assignment guidelines. 1, what am I being asked to do in this paper? For example, am I being asked to compare or analyze a topic? What is the purpose of this paper? 2, what questions do I need to answer in my paper? How will I organize and format my paper? This second one is particularly useful as it helps turn the assignment guidelines into a set of questions that you can use to answer throughout your paper. Reading these questions also helps you think about how you might organize your paper. 3, what sources should I use in my paper? 4, do I have questions about the assignment that I should clarify with my professor? Your professor is always a great resource to reach out to. If you have any concerns or queries about your assignment, it's always a good idea to check in with them. And then 5, what are my first steps? How am I going to start this assignment? So in order to answer the first question on the previous slide, what am I being asked to do in this paper? It can be really helpful to identify what verbs are being used in the assignment guidelines. They give you clues about what you need to do. So on this slide, you can see multiple examples of instructional words or instructional verbs, and these are all verbs that help explain what you're being asked to do in the assignment. Each verb here is asking you to do something slightly different. If you see a verb that you don't know, you can use the website that's linked on the slide, which is from York University, to help you get a better understanding of what is being asked of you. So for example, the York University website defines analyzing as breaking down the constituent parts of an issue, argument, or phenomenon, and considering their importance, role, and how they might inform one's understanding of the issue. Before we look at a couple of sample writing assignments, Coral, do you see any questions in the chat that we should address now?
Nope, everything's pretty quiet here. They seem to be following along.
Great, okay. So in that case, with the tools and questions you've discussed so far in mind, let's practice closely reading these sample assignment guidelines together. So the first question that we should probably ask ourselves is, what am I being asked to do in this paper? What is the purpose of this paper? I'm going to read the guidelines out loud just so that those of you who on your mobile devices can hear it if you're having trouble reading it. When I read through these guidelines, think about the following question. What do you think you're being asked to do? And then please feel free to answer in the chat. So the guidelines go, in his article, 7 Moral Challenges of Leadership, Nicholas Endler, 2019, discusses challenges for leaders of public and private organizations. Using your own words, summarize the 7 challenges. Select 2 that you believe are especially significant for leaders in 2020. Using examples from our course reading, formulate an argument showing why these 2 challenges are significant for leaders today. Your paper should be 750 to 1,000 words, double-spaced, and word processed using 12-point font. All sources should be cited using APA. Consult the University of Manitoba's website for the university's policies on academic integrity, and then the website is linked. Your paper must be uploaded as a Word document in Dropbox in our Learn course on September 30th, 2020. See the course policy in the syllabus for late papers. So what are you being asked to do in this paper? What is the purpose? Coral, are you seeing anything in the chat?
Yes, so they're pulling out the fact that you need to summarize, explain, and make an argument about significance.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So if I move the slide forward, you've pulled out all of the words that I've highlighted. So these key words and key verbs are in orange on this slide. You are being asked to summarize the 7 challenges in the article, and then select 2 challenges and formulate an argument explaining why the 2 challenges you selected are important for today's leader. And you're also asked to use examples to support this argument. So if you're unsure of exactly what it means to summarize or to argue, it might be useful to check the definition on the YorkView website we mentioned earlier. For example, the website defines summarizing as describing and highlighting the main aspects of a specific topic, and it defines arguing as taking a position on a defendable issue and convincingly defending it with evidence. So now that we have a good sense of what it is we're being asked to do, we can more easily begin to think about how we might go about doing it. So we can now ask ourselves, how should this paper be formatted and organized? What do you think? Again, please answer in the chat. How should this paper be formatted and organized? And Coral, hop in whenever you've got responses.
So they're definitely pulling out that you need to use APA format for your citations. Additionally, pulling out the double-spaced 12-point font, the word length. We also have a question about how strict professors are with their word length for their paper.
Yeah, I'd love to give you a very straightforward answer for that, but it depends on the professor. So that's a thing to actually clarify with your professor as well. If you think, oh, I might be under, I might be over, definitely a question to ask your professor and check in. Are you okay with, 5% over, 5% under, or is it really strictly within that limit? It depends, for sure. Is there anything else coming up in terms of organizing or formatting?
No, they've definitely got the formatting down pat, with pulling it right out of that middle paragraph.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing anything coming up for organization.
Okay, that's no problem. That's a little bit more hidden. So we'll talk about that in a second. So when it comes to formatting, yeah, you guys are right on top of it. 750 to 1,000 words, that word limit, is part of that, and so is APA, the style that you're supposed to be using. Definitely the double-spaced word process using 12-point font is also part of that formatting, but it's more logistics on top of formatting. Coming back to that length requirement of 750 to 1,000 words, This length requirement kind of indicates how specific this paper needs to be and how narrow or broad the scope of the paper is. So even if, your professor is a little bit more lenient with the word count, it still gives you a good sense of the scope of the paper and how kind of specific you need to get while you're writing it. So yeah. In terms of organization, how would you organize the ideas in this paper? Another way to think about that is how will the paragraph flow from one to the next? And although these guidelines aren't necessarily totally explicit about the organization of your paper, they do provide some really, really good hints as to how you might want to organize your writing. So, for example, you might want to organize your paper something like this. You might begin with an introduction that states your main argument. Then you could move into your first body paragraph, which summarizes the 7 moral challenges of leadership, as is required in the assignment guidelines. And then you could move into your next 2 body paragraphs, which would describe your argument, and each one would describe why one of the challenges you've chosen is significant for leaders today. These body paragraphs will also be where you include your evidence and examples from your course readings, as required in the assignment guidelines. Finally, you could arrive at your conclusion paragraph, which sums up the main argument of your paper once more, this time with the examples and evidence you presented in your body paragraph in mind. So as you can see with detailed assignment instructions like the ones we're working with now, you can often use them to guide your outlining and research and reading. For example, these detailed guidelines have allowed us to create headings for the sections of our paper before even looking at the sources that we're asked to use. From there, you could then use the assignment guidelines and the outline you created from them to help you create a note-taking system for your reading. So for example, you could create a separate page in a Word document for each section of the paper and take notes on each section there. With practice and experience, you'll find a way of outlining and organizing your ideas that works for you. But the important thing is that detailed assignments assignment guidelines like this one allow you to start visualizing and focusing your paper right away when you get them. All right, so coming back to our assignment guidelines again, the next question we should probably ask ourselves is, what are the sources for this paper? So again, please leave your answers in the chat here. What are the sources for this paper? What are we being asked to use? Or feel free to hop in whenever.
Yeah. So, yeah, people are pulling out that you need to use your course readings and pulling out the Elmer article that's listed at the top.
Yeah, that is exactly it. So you can see those highlighted in blue. Yes. So the guidelines are telling us we don't need to look for any sources outside of what's provided in class. To write this paper, you don't have to search for anything extra online. The guidelines do tell us, however, that we have to use sources from the course readings, like you guys said. The Nicholas Endler article can give us an overview of the moral challenges of leadership, and other course readings will provide us with examples of how these challenges might apply to leaders today. Please note that in tomorrow's workshop on finding and using sources, we'll provide some tips and resources you can use if you're having difficulties understanding your course reading. The next question you should ask while reading the assignment instructions is, do I have questions about the assignment that I should clarify with my professor? So if you think you'd have any questions left about this assignment guidelines, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and then Coral can pass them on. They arrive.
We have a question about, do we have to list out all our sources while writing a paper?
Yeah. So, yes, I would say so. Depending on the style, you'll do it in different ways, like the citation style, but pretty much all citation styles require you to have a list of your sources at the end of your paper. So it's a good idea to keep track of them while you're going.
Speaking of which, we also have a few questions wondering, what is APA exactly? Because it's been mentioned a lot, but I don't think we ever specified exactly what it is.
Yeah, for sure. So APA is a citation style, and basically what it's used for is to keep track of where your information and your evidence is coming from while you're writing a paper. So For example, in this paper that we would be writing, whenever we talk about the challenges of leadership in our summary, we would be citing Nicholas Elmer. We would be including Emler in parentheses beside that information. And that's APA style. There are other styles like Chicago or MLA, which you might be familiar with. But APA is one of them. So basically, it's a way of keeping track of where your ideas are coming from and leaving little flags for your reader that that information is coming from somewhere else, if that makes sense.
And how often would we need to cite in a paper like this?
How often? Anytime you're using something from outside of you. So anytime you're summarizing Nicholas Emler, you would kind of include that citation there. And anytime you're citing a course reading, an example from a course reading, you would cite that reading there. Basically, whenever you have information that isn't yours, you want to cite.
Are we able to use websites that will generate citations for us, or should we figure out how to do it ourselves?
Good question. I would always recommend figuring out how to do it yourself, if only to double check what's being generated by the website. So websites can sometimes be a little bit behind in the rules, or they might have a few kind of things that aren't quite right with the citations that they generate. So I think it's a good idea to have a good sense of what citation styles look like so that you can at least double check them if you're putting them through a machine. We have lots of resources on the Academic Learning Center's website and on the U of M Library's website about citing resources and citing referencing sources and all that. So, and you'll find out also a little bit more about that tomorrow in tomorrow's workshop. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Also, kind of leading into another plug for tomorrow's workshop, we had a question about how much should you direct quote, how much should you paraphrase, those kinds of questions.
For sure. Actually, that leads into tomorrow's workshop, and I believe it also kind of leads into Thursday's workshop as well, writing with voice and style and how to kind of integrate those sources. Personally, I would say it's always best to paraphrase. If you can, because it really shows your understanding of the material. It keeps everything kind of in a consistent voice. So yeah, direct quoting is useful in some situations, but for the most part, paraphrasing information will just get your point across in a much clearer, perhaps even more concise way.
And we also have a question coming up about length and being too wordy or not wordy enough to get to the word count and just managing to balance those concerns.
For sure, yeah. I think both sides of that kind of issue is a concern. Is it too short? Is it too long? I often find that professors have a pretty good sense of how many words it's going to take you to do what they're asking you to do. So you'll probably find that you land somewhat within the range of what they're asking you to do. And, you know, if you're under, you might want to think about expanding your ideas a little bit more, digging a little deeper. If you're over, that might be a hint that you're being a little bit too wordy, or maybe that your scope is too broad. If that answers the question.
Do you have to cite in text when you're paraphrasing?
Yes, you do. Yeah, any ideas that aren't yours need to be cited.
And can you ask your professor if you need a little more help understanding what the assignment is?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is getting into, actually, do I have any questions about the assignment that I should clarify with my professor, which is the next question you want to ask about our assignment guidelines? Yes, absolutely. You can ask questions about the assignment if you need help clarifying. Your professor is the one who probably wrote up the assignment, so they probably know what they're looking for. So if you need to clarify that stuff, for sure. For example, in this assignment, we might want to clarify how long the summary section should be versus the argument section, right? So maybe the summary section should be the same length as the argument section, or maybe one section should have more kind of priority than the other. And that's a good thing to clarify with your professor. I can tell you as someone who's written a few papers like this before, it's probably that you want to focus on the argument, because that's where you'll demonstrate critical thinking, which is often what professors are looking for. But it can be a really good idea to check that that is what they're looking for as well, because maybe they are looking for you to kind of demonstrate your understanding of the Endler article, so it should be more proportional. So that's one way to kind of check in. Another thing you might check in is once you make an outline, for example, like the one we made, is that outline making sense? Is it following kind of the instructions, and are you on the right track with this assignment? That's a thing you can ask the professor as well. You can also use office hours to discuss readings with your professor, especially if you're struggling to find examples for this paper. Those would all be kind of good uses of office hours and of reaching out to your professor for sure. Anything else coming up?
Do you have any good places to go if you need help with figuring out how to do your citations, all your referencing, to learn the differences between all the styles?
Yes, for sure. So the handouts that we have on the Academic Learning Center webpage, and I'll kind of link you to that near the end of the video workshop. And the U of M libraries has a lot of handouts. I believe they're actually the same. They're just linked in different places. And then also a website called OWL Purdue, which stands for Online Writing Lab kind of at Purdue University. That's a great place to go as well. It's pretty in-depth. So those two things are the places that I often go as a student and as a writing tutor.
And what person do you write in for this kind of paper? Since you're kind of making an argument, are you allowed to use I, or should you stick with third person?
That's a great question for your professor, actually. So you can double check kind of what the standards are in your field and see what your professor prefers. Sometimes there are discrepancies in terms of what one professor might want in terms of the person that you're using and what another professor might want in terms of person. So good question for your professor, for sure. Cool. Okay, and then now that we've dissected the assignment guidelines, and address some other questions that are coming up after reading these guidelines. I'm so glad that they're coming up. We can ask ourselves now, what would be the first steps in writing this paper? You can answer in the chat there as well. How would you approach this paper? What would your first steps be?
I'm seeing some people saying that reading the sources, doing that research, outlining, brainstorming, taking notes on what you're reading.
Yeah, those are all great. I love how much prep work you guys are putting in here. Yeah, so I would probably approach this in a very similar way. I would probably read through the Endler article, taking some notes to help me with the summary part of the article. And then I would decide which of the two challenges I want to focus on and begin looking for examples of those challenges in my course reading. Now, if I find that I have too much trouble finding examples of a particular challenge that I've chosen, I might go back again to the Endler article and then decide on a different challenge to focus on that might have more examples readily available in the reading. So I'd leave myself some room for flexibility in my plan and in my outline. But yeah, I think you guys are definitely on the right track with that. Yeah, start with the research, start with the reading and outlining and brainstorming for sure.
I also saw one comment that it can be really helpful to make almost a checklist from the assignment guidelines to follow while making your notes on the articles.
Oh, definitely. It can be super handy to have kind of a more list-like format instead of this big paragraph that you see in order to kind of make sure that you're getting all of the information you need out of your sources. Your outline can also serve as that as well, as long as your outline is following the assignment guidelines. Cool. Anything else coming up?
Just a lot of people realizing that organization is key to this assignment, figuring out how you're going to do it.
Absolutely. That is great. I'm so glad you're taking that away from this because it really is a lot about prep work and organization, and then writing becomes a lot easier. So, Cool. Okay. So moving on to the next slide, I've highlighted some of the things we've already talked about, but I just want to get into a little bit more detail about this. So in addition to all of the other information that we've already mined from the assignment guidelines, we can look to the assignment guidelines to find answers to more logistical kinds of questions, like what font should I use, what size should it be? That's a bit of a format question as well. Does my paper need to be double-spaced? Where should I submit my paper? What is the due date? So here we can see we can submit it in Dropbox, in UMLearn. The due date is September 30th. Something else you might want to clarify with your professor is what time. With the UMLearn Dropboxes, sometimes they shut down at a specific time during the day. So let's say you have a class meeting on September 30th. You might want to clarify with your professor, do I need to submit this before the class meeting, or do I have till 11:59 that night, or is there a different time? So that's something you might want to clarify. That's not in the guidelines, but you do have the date, so that gives you a good starting point. And you can often find answers to all of these different kinds of questions and a lot more in your assignment instructions, particularly when they're this detailed.
We also have a few questions coming up here.
Okay.
Can we upload it earlier than the deadline?
Yes. Yeah, usually you can. And if you can, I would absolutely encourage trying to get it done before the deadline, just to give yourself that extra bit of flexibility in the writing process.
Is this kind of information applicable to all sorts of courses, or is it more of generated to social sciences paper, or how much can this be applied to other courses?
That's a really great question. So this is definitely a social science-like assignment guideline, and you're going to see in a second, we're going to walk you through something that might be more English-like. So it's applicable in that these are questions that you should be asking no matter what your assignment guidelines look like, but there are kind of slightly different kinds of assignment guidelines that you might get, and we'll walk you through another type in a second.
And circling back a little bit for a late comment on your previous question on getting started, someone made a very good point that when you're making your notes from the readings, make sure to note down what source that information is coming from.
Yes, that is a great point. And you'll probably find out a little bit more about how you might go about doing that, again, in tomorrow's workshop about reading and using sources. But yeah, that's a super good point. Definitely always keep track of where things are coming from as you're keeping notes. For sure. If there's no other questions, I'll pass it back to Kathy, and we will walk you through a more English-like assignment.
Okay. Thank you, Natalie. I just want to say you're asking really good questions, and I can see that you're really mining that detailed assignment guideline to start pulling things out. See how much you can do without even knowing, without having read the Emler article, how you're already visualizing that paper. I just want to add a few things to the questions that you were asking in the chat. One is about going to talk to your professor to clarify the assignment guidelines. Absolutely. And this is a great reason for starting the paper early. It's a lot easier to go ask those questions if it's not the day before that assignment is due, if it's a couple of weeks. And I can tell you that it's really impressive for a lot of us when our students come early to our office hours. It shows that they are keen and hoping to do well. Just on the citing and the note-taking, I want to say tomorrow in the workshop, we will be looking at a couple of different ways to track information, take notes while you're reading. Yes, this is a really important point that you need to track the source of your information as you're finding it. And then in the workshop on Thursday, we're actually going to look at a sample paragraph that's written from those notes, and we're going to see how the writer integrates their own voice with ideas that come out of sources and where they cite. So if you want to see a concrete example of a short chunk of writing for that, please come on Thursday and we'll work our way through that. Now let's look at an assignment guideline that is sort of at the other end of the spectrum. It's possible that you could get an assignment guideline that looks more like the one on the slide here. One line. Discuss magic realism in Isabel Allende's book, The Stories of Eva Luna. Some students find it easier to use a guideline that looks like this. Some students find it easier to use a guideline that is more detailed. Let's run through the questions that Natalie introduced you to see what we can do with this assignment guideline. There's actually a lot we can do with it. Let's start with the question. What are you being asked to do? Can you add something to the chat? What are you being asked to do in this assignment guideline? Coral?
They're pulling out that you need to discuss the magical realism in that specific book. So, very straightforward.
Very straightforward. Now, what does it mean to discuss? It's kind of a vague instructional word. Does it mean that we're supposed to describe magic realism in the book? Or we're supposed to make an argument about it? We're supposed to analyze it, summarize it? What does discuss mean? Well, here, and Natalie, if you can advance the slide, we're going to turn back to the definition of that instructional word, discuss, from the Spark website at York University. That website tells us that discuss means to outline and highlight important aspects or issues related to a particular topic. Discuss means to make an argument based upon your reading. So in this assignment, we should consider magic realism as the important aspect, and we should formulate an argument about how magic realism works in Isabel Allende's book. So we're actually formulating an argument. Natalie, could you advance? Yeah, here we go. That's good. To help to get to an argument, we can turn this guideline into a set of questions about magic realism. So to get me started, I might generate these first two questions on the slide. What is magic realism? Where is magic realism found in the stories of Eva Luna? What are the examples? Once I found the examples of magic realism in the book, I'd study how those examples work and think more deeply about them. And I'd ask questions like, when does Allende use magic realism? How and why does Allende use magic realism in this book? What meaning does it add? What's the significance of magic realism overall? So I'd step back from those examples after pulling them out, and I'd start thinking about these things that I won't necessarily find direct answers for in the book. But these questions will help me move from specific examples in the book to an argument about the significance of magic realism. Now, here's a question for you. Let's go back to Natalie's set of questions. What sources would you use to write this paper? Add your thoughts to the chat. You can think of it. Oh, please go ahead, Coral.
Yeah. The book, The Stories of Eva Luna, everything that you've learned in class, course notes and academic journals on that topic, not Spark Notes.
Good. Okay, right on. I think you've touched on some of the big ones here. So definitely, the obvious one is the book, The Stories of Eva Luna. That's going to be our key source. Our course notes will be another resource. They'll help us understand what magic realism is as it is defined in our specific course. So we might get some definition from a Google search, but you'll find there will be a variety of definitions. We're going to want to use magic realism as it is defined in our course. So I would skim those notes to find out everything I could about what magic realism is and how it's considered to be in that course context. Another important resource that would help me with the paper is my course outline, also called the syllabus. Since there's not a lot of information in the guideline about how the paper should be formulated, I could look back to the course outline to see if there's a general write-up about what writing papers in this course is about. So for example, the course outline will likely tell me what citation style I should use. For an English literature paper like this, it's likely you'd be using a style called MLA. So for the earlier paper that Natalie looked at with you, it was APA. Now it's MLA, Modern Languages Association. I could check my course in UM Learn to see if resources for MLA have been added by my course professor. I could also, as Natalie pointed out, look at the library's website for help sheets on MLA. In addition, if the length of the paper isn't stated in the guideline, it's likely provided in the course outline. There may be other general instructions for all course papers in the course outline as well that I'd want to look at.
Kathy?
Yes.
If there aren't any instructions about that in either the syllabus or the assignment, is there a default you should use, or what should you do if that happens?
Yeah, there is not a default. This will be specific to every paper you'll write in every course. So if you cannot find this information, you've looked at your guideline, you've looked at the course outline, you've looked in UM Learn to see if there are any other resources in there about writing papers in the course. If you've mined all of that, this is a great question to ask your professor. And if you're asking it, and if you've looked at all those resources, I would guess a lot of other students have the same question. So you could ask it in class, or you could ask it in a discussion forum. Those will be used for the online courses this fall for you to ask questions, or you could use your prof's office hours. Is there anything else coming up in chat, Coral?
Well, that seems to be it.
Okay. I really like that someone pointed out that the course notes and what you talk about in your lectures will be an important source or resource for writing the paper. In the lectures, you would probably go over the themes, concepts, ideas that are relevant to writing your papers. And so we can't stress enough how important it is to attend class and review your lectures to succeed with the writing. There's a lot that is spoken about in class that doesn't actually land in those assignment guidelines, even I would say with the detailed assignment guidelines. Well, what else can we do with the assignment guidelines? This one we can actually even turn into the organization of a paper. When I pull out examples of how magic realism works in a book, I might find that it serves two purposes. If that's the case, I would think about organizing my paper like this. I plan to start with an introduction that gives a brief definition of magic realism, brief like a couple of sentences, and then a sentence or two that tells my reader what my main point or what my main argument about magic realism will be. For example, if I found that basically magic realism is used in two ways, I would state this right in my introduction. In the first body section of the paper, I would explain one of those ways. I'd provide a couple of key examples, not all of the examples I found, but some key examples, and then explain their significance. What do they show about magic realism in the book? Then I move on to the second body section, explaining the second of the ways that magic realism works. Again, I'd provide examples, a couple of key examples maybe, and explain what they show about magic realism in Allende's book. If I find when I'm analyzing my examples that magic realism works in more than two ways, I would expand this outline, maybe to include a third way but again, it depends on the length of the paper. Usually it's a good idea to go into more depth about a couple of points rather than to skim many points on the surface. So just to summarize what Natalie and I have been saying so far, assignment guidelines are important. You need to keep them close at hand through the whole process because they tell you about your professor's expectations for the assignment, and they give you a roadmap to the whole reading and writing process. Back to you, Natalie.
There we go. Yeah, so the assignment guidelines are really, really important, as we've been saying. And dissecting the assignment guidelines as soon as you get them can really help you get a sense of the steps involved in writing the paper and to plan out the reading and writing process. So on this slide, you can see an example of how I might break down and plan to attack the process of writing the paper about the moral challenges of leadership with Emler's article. You can see that I've broken down the process into multiple steps, and I've given myself lots of time to seek out resources should I need them during the writing process. So for example, in the orange, you can see that I've given myself a chance to book an appointment with a writing tutor, and I've actually left myself some flexibility to book a follow-up appointment as well with that tutor if I should need it. I've also left myself some flexible days to allow time to complete steps that might take longer than anticipated in the writing process, and that often does happen when you're writing. You're never quite sure how long something might take. You may get lost in an idea, you may kind of get really excited about something and spend a lot of time reading it, mining ideas out of it. So it's good to have that flexibility there. Writing can be a messy process, and so I might not complete all of these steps exactly in this order or all of them only once. I might circle back a few times, but this kind of map gives me an outline and a plan to get started, and it leaves me some flexibility should things need to change as well. So it's always good to start early because then you have that flexibility even within your plan. All right, so before we do a couple of activities to apply what we've learned today, Coral, do you see any questions in the chat that we should address right now?
One of the ones that I've been seeing come up a fair bit is asking about how papers and assignment guidelines are different in different faculties. So we've been sticking to the Faculty of Arts for both of these examples. So how are things different in, say, science or engineering?
That's a good question. Kathy, do you have any insight on that?
I would say the principle stays the same. Like whatever you're given, study it closely, study the course outline closely, see how much you can get out of that guideline, whether it's detailed or one line, see what you can get out of that, and talk to your professor, use the office hours early on in the writing process to answer your questions. I would also say, again, it's a great reason for coming and making an appointment to see a writing tutor. We have some writing tutors on our staff with strong backgrounds in the sciences, and you can make an appointment and you can bring your guideline. We'll be offering live online appointments this fall, so you can look at that guideline and talk with a tutor who has a strong sciences background, for example, to see what you can mine out of that.
We also have some students wanting to know if you need to cite your course notes or if you need to cite lectures.
Yeah, great question. That would be something probably you could clarify with your professor or instructor if they'll take it for granted that that's their course notes and lectures, or if they would prefer that you do cite them. I would say it's always better to oversight than to undercite, so if you're really not sure, I would cite them. And you can find resources on how to do that on OWL Purdue, and I think on our handouts as well. So.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of that. For example, in Introduction to University, students will be expected to cite the textbook, to cite their course notes, and in most cases, even the PowerPoint. In another course, it may be different. The instructor may look at that as sort of shared knowledge. So whatever context you're in, whatever course you're in, if you want to use your course notes or PowerPoint, please do ask your course professor. They may even show you how to do it or show you how they'd like that to be set up.
Would having a friend or family member proofread your paper be plagiarism or inappropriate collaboration?
That's a really good question. Kathy, do you want to take that one since you're doing the academic kind of integrity side of things in the workshop?
Yeah, sure. I'll happily weigh in on that, and I'm really glad you've asked that question. The guidelines are the same across the board, no matter who gives you feedback on your paper. You cannot have input on the content of your paper from anybody, from a writing tutor, from a family member. No one can revise sections of your paper, supply you with, like say, for example, I'm going to rewrite this paragraph for you. No one, whether that's a private tutor or a family member. If you search on the University of Manitoba website for a handout called Appropriate Collaboration on Writing, you will find a one-page tip sheet for seeking out feedback on your writing. So these guidelines apply to the writing tutors with our center, and they apply to family members across the board. So this handout will tell you what someone giving you early feedback on your work can and cannot do. There are lines that need to be walked, so great question there.
And because I'm seeing it a lot, we will be talking to you about how to make an appointment with an academic learning center tutor a little later on in the presentation.
Yes, actually right after these exercises, so that is coming up.
Natalie, I'm wondering if we should move past the exercises to the ALC tutors and then get the panel rolling.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually looking at the time and wondering if we might see through these. Yes, so I will hop past the exercises and hop forward in my notes. Okay, so yeah, speaking of ALC writing tutors, Academic Learning Center writing tutors, and other resources, I'm going to walk you through some of the services that the Academic Learning Center offers U of M students and how to book an appointment with a writing tutor, which is a burning question for sure. So at the Academic Learning Center, our mission is to support graduate and undergraduate students at the U of M in the development of their skills in writing, studying, and researching. So as such, our services at the Academic Learning Center include one-to-one online tutoring in writing and study skills and content for select courses, and supplemental instruction for select courses, as well as online support from an EAL specialist and tip sheets for writing and study skills. So although in this workshop I'm going to focus on accessing the writing tutor service from the Academic Learning Center, feel free to check out the Academic Learning Center's website for more information on the other services listed on this slide. I will have the website linked in a different slide. You'll be able to find it there. Okay, so first, just to give you a sense of who are the Academic Learning Center writing tutors? So we're upper-level students from a wide variety of academic backgrounds and for experienced writers who are trained on how to give feedback on student writing, but we're also neutral peers. So that means that we're not here to evaluate your work or judge it, but we're here to support you wherever you're at in the writing process. So what we do is connect with students to build scaffolds into the writing process so that writers can see where they might go next. And the most important thing we can do for you as tutors is to contribute to your motivation to keep on working on your writing. So now that you know a little bit more about the Academic Learning Center as a whole and the Academic Learning Center tutors, let's talk about how to make an appointment with a tutor. First, you'll need to navigate through our web page. This slide gives you a screenshot of what it looks like, and it also gives you the web address that you can use to get there. Once you're on our web page, to make an appointment with an Academic Learning Center tutor, you can click Make an Appointment with a Tutor. This will take you to the login page for the ALC's online booking system. If this is your first time using this system, you'll need to register for an account. To do so, just click register for an account. That'll open up this window, the registration window. Please remember to use your U of M student email address here on this form. The system will only create an account for you if you input your U of M email address here. This email address is also the means through which we will communicate with you and send you feedback, so that's really important, especially in this online era of university. So make sure you're using the right email address there. Now, once you've created an account, you can log into the Academic Learning Center's online booking system, and by default, you'll be taken to our main schedule, which is the undergraduate student writing schedule. To book an appointment, you're going to want to look for an open appointment, which are the white boxes, and then click on it. This will open up an appointment window with a form for you to fill out, and then filling out that form and clicking Create Appointment will finish booking your appointment, and it will show up yellow once it's booked, so that you can easily find it again in the schedule. And note that you can always go back and change your appointment or cancel your appointment or upload a new document to that appointment just by clicking on it. So just because you booked an appointment doesn't mean what you've put in the form to book that appointment is set in stone. You can always go back. Okay. If you have any questions about booking an appointment with a tutor or any trouble booking, please feel free to contact the Academic Learning Center at our email address, academic_learning@unetosha.ca. Yeah, and we look forward to hearing from you and working with you there.
Natalie?
Yes.
How much does seeing a tutor cost?
How much does it cost? Nothing. Well, nothing up front. You're paying for it in some of your student fees, but your out-of-pocket is nothing when you come and see us.
And who would you recommend come to see a writing tutor?
Anyone. Anybody who has any kinds of questions about their writing or would like to have someone take a look at it. No matter if you have, big questions or small questions, it's always useful.
So even if I'm a really good writer, I should see a tutor?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
So how does a tutor kind of help me out? So they aren't allowed to help me with my essay, but what does a tutor do?
Yeah, so we'll pick out things that you can improve on. We'll pick out trends. We'll pick out kind of a specific aspect of writing. Maybe it's organization. Maybe it's flow. Maybe it's your thesis statement. And we'll kind of help you work towards improving that aspect of your writing. So we like to work with students to improve their writing skills over time, not just for necessarily a specific paper, but so that you become a better writer overall, which is why it's great for anybody to come.
I'd like to jump in on that question too. Think about a writing tutor as the first reader of your paper. So they'll probably read part of your paper in chunks, in paragraphs, and they'll let you know like where it's flowing well, where it's making a lot of sense to them, and then maybe where the meaning isn't quite as clear. They'll usually ask you, I'll say always ask you, if they can read through your guideline first before they start reading your paper to make sure that you're, if you have turned it into a checklist, that it sort of follows everything. You've noticed everything in the guideline that it's asked you to do. But think about your tutor as a person who is going to give you feedback as one reader to let you know where you might need to clarify your meaning and where everything is working well.
Mm-hmm.
Is tutoring only available for first-year students?
No, it's available for anyone, basically. We have graduate tutors as well, graduate writing tutors. So first year all the way up to fourth, fifth, whatever year, as well as graduate tutors.
Natalie and Coral, I think I'm just going to jump in here and say, let's end the recording now. And since we have so many good questions about the writing tutors and also writing assignments, let's bring our writing tutors into this discussion. So along with Natalie, I would like to introduce you all to